Mr. Aronson is the longtime principal of Wilson Elementary School. He's had the same secretary, Mrs. Russo, for the past 20 years. Due to increased enrollment, a second secretary, Miss Patrick, is hired. In her direct dealing with Mr. Aronson, Miss Patrick is treated in an appropriate professional manner at all times. However, Miss Patrick becomes uncomfortable with some of the comments that Mr. Aronson makes to Mrs. Russo.
Okay then, babe, why don't you go ahead and set up that staff meeting? I want to get it on the calendar ASAP.
It's getting late and I want to get that field day notice out before the end of the day. We finally have approval for the new date. I'll set up your staff meeting tomorrow. Will that be okay?
Do you see what I've had to put up with for the past 20 years? Well, okay, I guess you can wait until tomorrow. I'm not sure if I told you this today, but you're looking very sexy in that outfit. If your husband Mike wasn't such a great guy, I'd steal you away tomorrow.
Oh, you're too much. Come on, let's go. We have to get those field day notices out.
Carla, does he always talk to you like that? Babe? Sexy?
Oh, he doesn't mean anything by it.
Well, it's been bothering me since I started working here. I'm really uncomfortable with the way he talks to you. I can't believe some of the things he says.
I assure you, he's completely harmless. And besides, I'm not at all offended by his behavior.
Miss Patrick decides to file a sexual harassment complaint against Mr. Aronson because she feels the environment his behavior creates is sexually charged, making her feel very uncomfortable.
Hello, my name's Linda Patrick. I'm a secretary over at Wilson Elementary School. I started here in January and have become increasingly uncomfortable here. The principal I work for, Mr. Randy Aronson, he harasses the other secretary, and I can't take it anymore.
The district's affirmative action officer, Sandra Boston, meets with her. Ms. Patrick tells her all about how Mr. Aronson addresses Mrs. Russo and the things he says to her. She explains that she has tried to ignore the comments, but they are made every day. The situation makes her extremely uncomfortable. He never says anything offensive directly to her, only to Mrs. Russo. She hasn't said anything to Mr. Aronson because she's been afraid of losing her job. She's tried talking to Mrs. Russo, who dismisses the behavior as joking around. Mrs. Boston assures her that she is doing the right thing by reporting the situation and she won't be fired. Mrs. Boston meets also with Mrs. Russo and a number of other staff members to gather information. Mr. Aronson is informed that a complaint has been filed against him.
Sexual harassment? I know why you're here. I can't believe this is happening. The whole thing is ridiculous.
Well, as you were informed last week, a complaint has been filed against you.
You've known me for years.
Please understand, as the affirmative action officer in this district, I'm doing my job. I need to talk to you. I've already been interviewing some other people to gather information.
Okay. I want to settle this thing as soon as possible. I'll tell you whatever you need to know.
Okay. What is your relationship between you and Mrs. Russo? Do you ever socialize outside of school?
My goodness. We go back a long way. She's worked for me for over 20 years. I've met her family, her friends. I know her husband well. We get along marvelously. I went to her son's graduation party last year. Her family used to come to my daughter's softball games, that kind of thing.
Welcome to this segment of Legal One New York, and we're going to be discussing the issue of hostile workplace and what the legal requirements are as far as ensuring that all employees have a workplace that is free from any sort of discrimination and any sort of harassment. You've seen a video clip today that addresses the issue of a hostile workplace. I'm here to discuss this with Art Scheuermann, who is legal counsel for the School Administrators Association of New York State. Art, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for having me, David.
So this is an issue that arises oftentimes in school districts. What actually constitutes a hostile workplace?
Well, as you saw from the video, a hostile workplace really involves something of what's referred to under the law as a protected class. Typically in a hostile work environment in New York, as well as throughout the United States, it's based on gender or sexual orientation, but could be any kind of thing, for example, racial or age-related. But it's when that protected class or that particular item becomes the focus point in the work environment.
So in this particular video that we saw, we had a longtime principal, had the same secretary for many years. The two of them seemed to be very friendly with each other and were joking around. And he made some comments in the video. He says to her, "You're looking very sexy today. I would steal you away if your husband wasn't such a great guy." She did not seem to be offended by those comments.
Correct. So in this particular video, what we saw was a gender-based one, and what the point was, the comments made and the jokes and the innuendo associated with those jokes doesn't have to be directly directed at a particular person if other people in the work environment are exposed to it and it makes them feel uncomfortable. And then you get into a whole analysis of, does it constitute a pervasive course of conduct that this person is suffering from?
So in this case, we had another secretary in that office who's overhearing these comments and feels very uncomfortable and decides that she's going to file a complaint and shouldn't have to accept that sort of language in the workplace.
That's true. And here, the principal, as you noted, had a very good relationship with the longtime secretary, but the new secretary, he really had no type of relationship like that, and he did not know that his offensive conduct bothered her, and that gave her the grounds to proceed.
So that's an important point. Sometimes we have a hostile workplace created even though somebody is not intending to cause harm, is not intending to harass.
That sometimes happens, and other times it's more overt, where they definitely want to have a sexually charged work environment, and even perhaps what we call under the law a quid pro quo kind of relationship with their fellow employees or subordinates.
So when you talk about the issue of harassment, there's really two types of harassment we want to talk about. One is a hostile workplace, and we saw that in the video. And that's where you're creating an environment that makes somebody feel uncomfortable, and it's linked to a protected class, something like gender, or it could be race or ethnicity or disability. But you also mentioned quid pro quo.
Right, and a quid pro quo is a situation where you would find a superior, a supervisor, a boss, asking you to do certain things based on, for example, using gender as a basis, having sex with that person, or looking, if you don't have sex with me or go out with me, I'm not going to give you that raise, or I'm not going to give you that new promotion. And that's where quid pro quo it would come in.
Okay.
And those are typically less frequently involved in what's going on in society today, in school districts particularly, but it's still prevalent. Not nearly as much as the sexually charged hostile work environment.
Okay. So the quid pro quo is less common, but does happen. And what we're talking about there is somebody saying, if you accept these sexual advances, something positive will happen, or conversely, maybe somebody saying, if you reject these advances, something negative is going to happen.
Correct.
And the negative could be as serious as losing your job, but it doesn't have to be that serious, does it?
No, it could be simply a poor evaluation, a series of counseling memos. You refuse my advances, so now I'm going to criticize you at every opportunity.
Sure. Or maybe you're going to have the less comfortable classroom, or you're going to have some additional assignments and you're going to be working longer hours.
Right, or not assistance in the classroom,
Exactly.
where other teachers who have a better relationship with that person may have those advantages.
So how do we address an employee who thinks that they are being forced to work in a hostile workplace?
Well, the first thing I look at, and in the last couple of years I've experienced through my clients, a confusion over what is a hostile work environment under the law to what I euphemistically call a dysfunctional work environment.
Sure.
And so one of the things that we try to talk about when the client calls who's concerned about their work environment is to probe first what is going on in terms of what is the conduct,
Sure.
and is it related to a protected class, in this case typically gender.
Sure.
And if it's not particularly related to their gender, then it makes me feel, and my analysis concludes that it really isn't a hostile work environment under the law per se. But then I also ask questions like, how frequently does the conduct occur?
Sure.
When does the conduct occur? Are there witnesses to the conduct? And we start to formulate a strategy based on that. Now, oftentimes we have people who engage in what I call bullying or just general meanness in the workplace.
Sure.
And I'll give you an example. We've had clients call, whatever I do, it's not right. I have to rewrite memos constantly. In meetings with my peers, fellow principals, administrators, I'm criticized publicly by this person. In private, I'm screamed at. This isn't appropriate, is it? This is a hostile work environment. And I always tell those people, you're enduring bullying in the workplace. Now, what he's doing to you isn't necessarily actionable under the law because he's not doing it based on your gender, for example. He's not doing it, or she's doing it based on your age or your race.
Sure.
He's just what we call an equal opportunity bully.
Yes.
And those kinds of individuals, we ask them then, what is going on in your district in terms of your rights? So I ask them, what does your collective bargaining provide for? Does it provide for a contractual right to a free and peaceful kind of work environment? Also, what are the board policies governing the district? Do they have a section dealing with employee complaints? Do they have a section dealing with harassment in the workplace? Mm-hmm. And can we fit what's occurring in that particular case within that definition? And those are the first two things locally I ask them about. Then I ask them, well, who is your officer involved in terms of, under the law, it would be the Title IX officer who investigates these. Sometimes we even get the situation where the alleged harasser is that person.
Sure.
So we would ask, and we've written letters to the school district to hire independent counsel to investigate those matters. And those are the first two steps locally you should do.
So, along those lines, I would assume sometimes you take those steps, you really look into this closely, and you see that the behavior is not linked to a protected class. It's not linked to gender, but somebody is being treated unfairly. Somebody is being evaluated more harshly than some of their colleagues. In this day and age, that really can have very high stakes. So what tips might you look at if you have an employee who thinks that they're being evaluated unfairly, they're being given extra responsibilities beyond other employees, even if it's not a form of discrimination?
If it's not a form of discrimination, you still have rights under the law. And I would again look to the board policies to see if there's a code of conduct for employees as well as students. And does it bind them to engage in a professional dialogue at all times? Now, as you noted before, with high stakes evaluations now and the fact that it could lead to your dismissal from the job, I think anyone who feels they've been unfairly criticized in written form or even orally should respond in writing.
So that's the first thing. That's very important. Sometimes clients are reluctant to do that and to put their concerns in writing.
That's true, but you can put them in writing in a different way.
Yes.
And that's by keeping a diary or a journal of exactly what has happened to you and when it's happened, so that when you reflect back upon it in a year or two, you can say, yes, this happened on this date, and I know that with certainty because I wrote it down. And I always made it a practice that whenever something bothered me that happened I didn't believe was legitimate, I would write it down.
Good.
Another thing you can do is if you encounter this person and they are engaging you in an unprofessional way, a bullying way, a harassing way, you can ask them for them to stop and document that. Now, typically, some people, and this is not the good strategy to employ, is I will engage in similar behavior that he is or she is. I do not recommend that. What I would rather say is try to diffuse the situation by pointing out that treat me in a professional manner. Don't yell at me. Don't scream at me. I am an adult like you, and we can professionally agree to disagree, but do it in a professional manner. Now, if that course of conduct after you've tried that, resolve it in that way doesn't work, I would say do not meet with that person alone any longer. Always have a union representative, a colleague at those meetings, and try to stop that.
Good. And if somebody happens to be a member of SAANYS, of course, they can always pick up the phone and ask for guidance from the association and from legal counsel as well.
SAANYS offers a very unique benefit in that SAANYS employs a series of labor relations specialists and regional representatives that provide professional counseling and professional advice to members. So in the situation where we're talking about dysfunctional work environment, they can offer insights and suggestions on how to handle that. SAANYS attorneys are always available to take the questions and to go through the initial analysis. Is this in fact a legally based protected class hostile work environment, or is it the dysfunctional work environment? And I think that anyone who's a member of SAANYS should utilize these services, because what you are going through is something other administrators throughout the state have experienced. And we have a lot of insight and suggestions on how to tackle the problem.
If somebody finds themselves in a situation like this where there's been one incident and they're fearful of future incidents of either harassment or just a dysfunctional workplace where they're not being treated fairly, what sort of strategy should they think about going forward so the situation doesn't get worse?
I think first confront the person about that. If that does not work, then I think you call SAANYS. Because if you've tried it on your own to resolve it and it hasn't worked, then SAANYS will get involved by working through your union perhaps, working through the school lawyer, working through members of the board who SAANYS may know, and trying to resolve these issues in an amicable way. And sometimes it doesn't work out. And we have a case right now, which is a very high-profile case, where not only the administrators have issued a vote of no confidence against the chief operating officers, but so has the teachers union and these blue-collar workers in that district.
Wow.
And the only people standing by this person is the board, and not even all the board. So there are lots of ways to tackle these situations when they arise, but the key is to try to resolve it if you can, in the first instance with a direct conversation. If not, we have a series of strategies we will employ at your request.
And certainly we don't want to escalate the situation. I mean, one point you made I thought was so important was that if somebody is using abusive language, acting inappropriately towards you, don't rise to that level or lower yourself to that level and start doing the same things.
Absolutely, because I find that you see a lot of districts justifying a boss's behavior, saying, well, that's the way they all acted together. And if you don't take the bait
Yes.
and conduct yourself professionally still, that may in itself diffuse that behavior going forward.
Are there things that we can do to look at the overall climate of a building to try to get staff members to act in a more respectful, understanding way towards each other?
Well, I often think that the principal is the school leader, the building leader. He sets the tone. And I think if you conduct yourself in a very professional manner, then your employees, your staff, your faculty will follow suit.
So the principal can really set the tone and in many cases help, by example, lead and say this is the way we're going to act towards each other.
Oh, absolutely. The principal is the culture maker, if you will. In one way.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Art.
You're welcome.
So in closing, it's important for employees to fully understand their rights when it comes to the issues related to hostile workplace, employment discrimination, and whether or not somebody is being treated fairly or unfairly in the workplace. Oftentimes, employees may believe that they are being victimized in one way or another. The discussion that we had highlights the analysis that we need to go through to determine whether there is a legally protected hostile workplace issue that has to be addressed. Is somebody being singled out because of a protected class? Could be gender, could be disability, could be race, could be ethnicity. So one of the key questions, as we talked about, that we have to address, is there a protected class that is being addressed? Even if there's not, even if somebody is being treated unfairly and it's not because of a protected classification, part of the point we're trying to get across here is that employees deserve to be treated in an appropriate professional manner in the workplace. So in those cases, it's critical that you recognize the rights you have under your collective bargaining agreement as professional employees. And when you need to, that you know to reach out for help to your state association, SAANYS, that you need to reach out when you're being treated unfairly and ensure that your rights are being protected. Hopefully this video will help you understand those rights, understand the law related to sexual harassment, the law related to hostile workplace, issues related to quid pro quo harassment, and issues related to simply being treated unfairly as an employee. In this day and age, with the high stakes related to staff evaluation, it's critical that all employees protect their rights and understand their rights. Thank you very much for participating in this Legal One New York program.